Holy shit! Deadpool is gonna be rated R! That's gotta be the first time I've ever seen an R-rated comic book movie. Well, actually...
What's wrong, baby?
Look, Curtis.
You know, I'm trying. Really, I am.
It's over. You wanna give
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind? Everybody thirsty? I hope you're all very fucking thirsty.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Holy shit! Marvel just announced they're gonna make a Black Panther movie with Chadwick Boseman. That's the first time we've ever seen a comic book movie with a black lead. Well, actually... Wow! Oh my god. Venom actually feeds on human beings? I don't think a comic book movie has ever done that before. Well, actually... Our story starts with the exploits of a couple partygoers headed for a rave in the back of a meatpacking facility. The man seems to be enjoying himself well enough until the sprinklers start going off, but what they sprinkle out isn't water, but human blood. The rest of the ravers, the man's date included, reveal themselves to be vampires. The man tries to flee, but is eventually caught before he can escape. But his life is saved by the arrival of our titular character, Blade, the vampire hunter. Our partygoer drops out of the story from here, and we're treated to why Blade is so feared by these monsters, when he literally destroys all but one of them before the police arrive to see about the disturbance. Our sole survivor is then taken to the morgue, having been assumed dead after being burned alive by Blade. The attendees start to perform their duties on the poor man before he awakens and treats us to our first kill by a vampire in this film. He attacks both attendees and kills one before infecting the other. But said attendee is then rescued by Blade, who is tracking the bloodsucker from before. When the vampire escapes his grasp a second time, Blade then opts to escort the good doctor to his hideout to see if his friend Whistler can help her out before she changes. We're then introduced to our main villain, Deacon Frost, and we're also introduced to some interesting lore. There's a hierarchy among vampires. Those who were born a vampire are superior to those who were turned, which puts Deacon on the outside looking in as a former human turned into a vampire, trying to make his way up the metaphoric food chain. The leaders of the vampire houses have ongoing treaties with the human governments of the world, but Deacon asks, why the hell should they bother when they literally feed on these people? The leaders don't argue whether he is right or wrong, but they simply insist that this is the way it has always been, and therefore should always be. We then cut back to Blade, where we finally learn why he's so effective at killing vampires. He's one of them. Well, sort of. What he actually is a daywalker. A being with human and vampire traits. His mother and father were both humans, but his mother was bitten by a vampire while she was still pregnant with Blade. As such, certain traits were passed on to Blade. He's as strong and fast as a vampire, he has sharpened senses, and unfortunately, he also has a hunger for human blood, but he also lacks their weaknesses, like garlic, silver, and of course, sunlight. This not only makes him a deadly foe to vampires in combat, but also allows him to pinpoint the difference between a human and a vampire before the fight even starts. We're then back to Deacon, where we see more tension between him and the house leaders of the Vampire Collective, as he attempts to decrypt an ancient stone text from a long-lost vampire culture. The head of all the vampire houses insists that the secrets are too old to be translated, especially when beings far older than him have tried to understand them and ultimately failed. But Deacon shuts him up and convinces him to leave eventually. Back on the human side of the story, we're back with Dr. Karen Jensen, the attendee who was infected by the vampire at the start of the film. Whistler managed to fix her up okay, so Blade dropped her off back into her old life, but she's being stalked by some odd characters. There's a brief hope spot, though, when a police officer arrives to talk to Karen about the attack in the hospital, but then things go sideways all over again when the cop attacks her. Karen assumes the cop is a vampire and tries to disable him by hitting him with some garlic pepper spray, but the man is actually a human in service to vampires. Fortunately for Karen, though, Blade arrives before the officer can do anything to her, and we find out the doctor was actually bait for Blade to get to the cop's master, Deacon Frost. So in exchange for his life, the cop leads Blade to the vampire archives that we saw Deacon studying in earlier. We then move back to Deacon himself. We find that he's deciphered the text, learning that it's a ritual of some sort. We then hear from the vampire's pet policeman, who tells him how much he's messed up. Naturally, Deacon decides it's time for dinner and feasts himself on the officer's carotid artery. After this, we cut back to Blade and Dr. Karen in the archives, and we meet up with another vampire named Pearl, a rather Jabba the Hutt looking fellow with ties to Deacon. With some persuasion, and he explains that the ritual is meant to awaken a vampire god called La Magra. Once they get the info they need, though, they're ambushed by Deacon's thugs, who manage to apprehend Blade until Whistler arrives to save our duo, and they all make it back to base. We cut back to the vampire side again, and we see more vampire politics. Specifically, a political assassination. Deacon has kidnapped the head of the Vampire Leadership Council and decides to chew him out for a few minutes as the sun rises, while he and his friends are all wearing sunscreen. The vampire leader is indifferent to this because no matter what Deacon does, he'll never be a pureblood. So, to add an insulting injury to the man's imminent death, Deacon rips out the house leader's fangs with a pair of pliers before leaving the man to burn alive in the early morning sun. Because contrary to what the Klingons may tell you, revenge is a dish best served piping hot. We return to Blade's story with the Daywalker telling Whistler about what he and Karen found in the archives, and Karen herself showing Blade a new weapon she'd helped Whistler develop before she'd left. A chemical compound based on EDTA, which causes vampire blood to explode upon exposure. This is all well and good, but Blade needs to head back downtown to get some of the serum that allows him to sate his hunger for blood. But while he's out, he bumps into Deacon, who's abducted a human child to coerce Blade into a parley. Deacon's spiel boils down to, "Join me and we'll rule the galaxy as father and son." I mean, rule the world as two good buddies. But Blade sees right through it and suggests that what he really wants is to put Blade on his side so he can summon Lamagra without any issues from a pesky hunter like him. Deacon is insulted by Blade's refusal and chucks the kid into the street for a quick getaway when Blade inevitably opts to be a hero. We cut back to Karen and Whistler, who are working together on a cure for vampirism before they're ambushed by some of Deacon's cronies. Blade returns to the base to find Karen gone and Whistler beaten within an inch of his life and infected. Whistler uses his last few breaths to explain that Lamagra is in fact a vampire god and that the key to summoning him is the blood of a daywalker. Whistler then asks Blade to give him his gun so that he can off himself before the blood-sucking bastards can finally turn him into one of them. Blade sadly agrees and heads out to face Deacon and save Karen. We then move out to Deacon's compound, where we see Blade carving his path of destruction to get to the little bastard and save his doctor friend. When he's stopped cold by Deacon's main squeeze, also known as Blade's own mother. Blade is so stunned by this reveal, that he doesn't sense Deacon and company coming to disable him with tasers and electric batons. After Blade is taken down, they prep him for the ritual and toss Karen aside to be eaten by her colleague from the start of the movie. Thanks to some quick wits and said colleague being starved for blood, she manages to evade the freak and rescue Blade, who's currently having his blood drained for Deacon's Lamagra ritual. So by the time Karen reaches Blade, his strength is almost gone, and he's without access to his serum. Karen immediately knows what to do and offers herself for Blade to feed on so as to rejuvenate himself. Blade hates the idea, but ultimately agreed, knowing they'll both die if he doesn't. Once he's refreshed himself on some tasty AB positive, Blade gets back to work on taking down every single one of those stupid bastards before making his way to Deacon himself. The two engage in one-on-one combat with swords, with Blade, naturally, proving himself to be the superior swordsman. Alas, skill means nothing when your opponent can literally regenerate from any injury instantaneously, including being cut in half. Deacon tosses Blade around for funsies, but Blade comes up with a new plan. The ritual essentially made Deacon a walking, talking bag of vampire blood. So why not use that chemical Karen made that makes vampire blood go kablooey? So Blade sticks Deacon full of EDTA, and Deacon explodes like fireworks on the 4th of July. We then cut back to the surface with Karen mentioning that she does have a cure for Blade, but Blade declines. If there's still a war going on between humans and vampires, then a soldier for the human cause needs every advantage he can use. We have a quick epilogue in Moscow, and then cut to credits. Pros. Wesley Snipes had, of course, been in action films before this movie, but I think it's fair to say that Blade is his signature role, and for very good reason. Snipes owns this role like he was born to play it. And what I like is how what could have been a pretty standard, stoic hero is given some extra personality by Snipes. When Karen asks if Blade cares about Whistler, a lesser actor would have taken his line about Whistler being the weapon maker and Blade being the weapon user at face value. But Whistler takes the line and makes it sound like he's trying to deny how much he cares about the old man. These are two people who have been through too many hardships in their lives. Far, far too many. And neither one is ready to admit that the other is someone important to them. So, Blade's dismissal of their relationship as just gunsmith and gunslinger is just him trying to convince himself that he doesn't really care about Whistler, so that if either of them are ever killed, the other is somehow allowed to move on. It's not a macho, men don't have feelings, men don't love sort of thing. It's a damaged individual trying to convince himself that he doesn't care so that he won't get hurt in the end. Stephen Dorff as Deacon Frost is a fantastic villain. What I really love about his character, and this movie in general, is that he's not the king monster. If this movie were made today, you could pretty much replace every instance where vampires mock him for not being a pureblood with them just insulting him for being a millennial. He has power already. He owns a lot of vampire clubs that are pretty popular with the youths, but he doesn't have the real kind of power. He wants to go from the ruler of a small little pocket of the world to the ruler of the entirety of the world. And I like how he actually uses his chance at revenge on one of the purebloods to really push the idea that maybe he's the one who's really better because he wasn't born a vampire. He asks the leader of the Vampire Council if he enjoys watching the sunrise. And then notes, oh yeah, this dude has never seen a sunrise because he was born a vampire. Deacon actually got to experience certain pleasures in life because he used to be human. But at the same time, he also wishes to divorce himself from his humanity. His frustration with the leaders of the vampire houses is that they've made deals with the leaders of the human world. The humans are their food, not their allies. They should be cowering in fear of them, not making back alley deals with them. And I think that's why he also wants to take the power of La Magra. The pureblood vampires see him as one step above a human, but in Deacon's mind, they cling to a humanity that they never even had. With the power of La Magra, he'll become even less human than the purebloods, and therefore, more vampire than them. And on top of all that, Stephen Dorff really is just a wonderfully charismatic actor, right? I really wish he got to get more high-profile work. Chris Christopherson plays Whistler, and while I've only seen Mr. Christopherson in this particular role, I really do like what he brings to the part. He's your standard cranky old mentor character we've seen in a dozen other movies, but there's a heart to it. Whistler says that when he was a younger man, a group of vampires kidnapped him and his family, and made him choose which order his wife and daughters died in. After that, it's pretty easy to understand why Whistler dedicated the remainder of his life to murdering these creatures. Blade actually says that the man is literally dying of cancer, and Whistler just won't get treatment because he wants to focus on the mission. He wants to dedicate the remainder of his life to killing these monsters that took his family from him. And so with all that, you wouldn't put him past him to just end Blade when he found him feeding on a homeless person when the guy was only 13. But instead, he took the kid in and helped him control his hunger. It may help that Blade turned out to only be half a vampire instead of 100% a vampire. But I'd like to think that he'd have had to have shown some kind of restraint in order to have found that out in the first place. And when I see Whistler talk to Blade, I really do get a fatherly vibe from him. You can tell he thinks the world of this man, even if he could still call him a stupid SOB with his last breath.
Now walk away, you stupid son of a bitch.
N'Bushe Wright plays Dr. Karen, and she sells the hell out of what probably could have been a pretty thankless role. A lesser actress could have probably made you annoyed that she was here when the focus could have been on Blade or Deacon, but instead you're actually interested in where her story goes. She's never been in a situation where she had to use violence as a tool, and it's frightening as hell. But she knows it's the only way that she'll see tomorrow, and if these creatures are ready and willing and eager to hurt her, she's not going to hesitate either. But at the same time, she's not getting all trigger happy. Her mind is her greatest tool, and she uses it to aid herself. Like when she creates the EDTA weapon that causes the vampires to explode. I'm sad that Miss Wright didn't get to be a bigger name. Her last acting gig was in 2015, and in 2006 before that. If the MCU ever does put Blade back on screen, either big, small, or even handheld, maybe someone at Disney or Marvel should give her a call. I'm sure she'd love the job. I really love the opening with the Vampire Club. It starts out the way you'd expect any rave to go. Then it turns freaky. You're thinking this is just a cool way to show that vampires exist by having them invite some poor schmuck to dance only to bleed him dry. But instead, Blade bursts in and everything just stops. Every dancing vampire that was ready for dinner is now quiet as a mouse. And you realize you've just met the one thing that the monsters look for under their beds at night. And then, of course, we see the fight start, and we not only see how competent Blade is as a warrior, we actually see that these particular vamps aren't even that much of a threat to him. At one point, he throws his shotgun aside and starts chucking vampires aside with his bare hands or cutting them down with his sword. And it's all brilliantly punctuated by both the soundtrack and the score by Mark Isham. While I wish certain points of the mythology were more expanded on, I like the ideas were presented in the film, like that vampires actually have humans that they've staked a claim on. In real life, there are plenty of people who are so lost and without purpose, they end up gravitating towards violent causes just so that they can gain a sense of control, power, and belonging. So I can totally see some people selling out their own species just so they can get a taste of the savage power of being a monster. Cons. On the flip side, I really have to agree with Deacon when he asks why the hell there are ongoing treaties with the human race. It's one thing when it's something like Hellboy 2, where there was a peace treaty between the elves and humanity at, like, the start of human civilization. But as time passed and humanity expanded, the treaty was not only abandoned, but outright forgotten. That makes sense because unlike the elves, where they're all ruled by one single monarch, humans have divided up the earth into shares. Some humans own this piece of land, other humans own this other piece of land. And these different groups of humans answer to different leaders who don't even rule the same way. France is led by a democratically elected president. Russia is ruled by a dictator who feigns being democratically elected. And Saudi Arabia is controlled by an old-school traditional monarchy. It makes sense that as our people spread out across the world, we'd think less about these old treaties and more just about what is our benefit, and even start to view them as non-binding because we didn't make these treaties. They were made between the elves and a nation we are no longer part of. But the idea in Blade is that the vampire nation has secret ongoing treaties with human governments. Does, like, a representative of the Vampire Council, did they just go to the White House in 98 and talk to Bill Clinton? Hey, I know you're in the midst of this whole shit with Monica Lewinsky, and I get that that's bad, but, like, would you mind if we kept on feeding on the undesirable people of your society just so you guys won't come out and destroy all of us? Pretty please with sugar on top? And Clinton was just like, why the hell not? Like, that's a pretty big and intriguing detail that you're not explaining. Goyer, Norrington, come on guys, give me something here. Give me something here. What's the deal with bringing in Blade's mom as a vampire? Like, I can understand showing her death at the start of the art, but making her Deacon Frost's lover? Why? And having her feel up Blade while explaining that she's really not his mother anymore? Why? I'm not even sure what her dialogue before she actually bleeds Blade to start the Lamagra ritual is supposed to mean. She explains that she's killed humans since Deacon turned her, fed on them and enjoyed it, and notes that he's probably killed a few of her kind since he became a hunter and enjoyed that too, which sounds like a thoughtful, where not so different monologue, until you realize, yeah, Blade probably would openly admit he enjoys killing vampires. We see throughout the film that he does actively enjoy the hunt. He relishes in hurting bloodsuckers. We even see him do a fist pump when he manages to stake a vampire and nail him to the wall. He doesn't pretend he hates what he does. He likes it. He likes murdering murderers. This doesn't contribute to the story, ultimately, since Blade doesn't start to view vampires as people after this. In fact, his first vampire or kill after being powered up by Karen is dear old mom. And he views that as freeing her.
I must release you.
Again, Goyer, Norrington, what are you doing? What was going on here? Overall, despite some of my quibbles, Blade really is a great movie. Even 20 years later, even after all we've seen from the comic book movie genre, this is still a triumph. The character work is lovely, the action is great, and it's a genuinely atmospheric and stylish film in its own right. I'm going to give Blade a 4 out of 5. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. And if you did, like this video and subscribe to my channel. I just did unscripted vlogs for the 2018 Halloween film by David Gordon Green and Sony's new Venom film starring Tom Hardy. I've also previously talked about more recent comic book films like Watchmen, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Justice League, the aforementioned Black Panther, and even Deadpool 2. Links to those videos will be available down below, so check those out if you feel so inclined. Happy Halloween, everyone. Woodstock, out.